Chairs No Waiting, episode number 610. Is it loaded? Two Chairs No Waiting is brought to you each week by the folks over at weaversdepartmentstore.com. Drop by over at Weavers and check out some of the great new lithographs, or prints, if you want to call them that we have that are very special editions because they're autographed by George Lindsay. We have a Talent of Goober lithograph as well as a Three Faces of Goober lithograph, both autographed by George. Definitely something you want to check out. Or maybe you want to get you a Mayberry hat, a Mayberry Patrol Car emblem hat, all those things over at Weavers and more, so go and check it out. Two Chairs No Waiting is brought to you also by donations from listeners just like you. The executive producer of episode number 610 is Jim Sherrill. Jim Sherrill, so thank you very much for being executive producer and supporting the podcast, and thank you for being here as well. Man, it is always fun to just spend a little bit of time in Mayberry, and I hope you feel that way every week when we gather and are able to just talk about some of the things we found out during the week or ran through, or people have emailed me, whatever the thing might be. It's always fun just to share some of that with you and just try to get that Mayberry spirit going, to get that, just forget about your day and have fun. And that's what we're all about here, is just having a good time. And I hope I bring a smile to your face, or the show does, as we go through it. So this episode is called Is It Loaded? And that's because we're going to go back and visit a little bit about some of our discussions in the past few weeks about the guns, about the weapons, the weapons that were in Mayberry. We're going to go back and talk about those just a little bit. But before I get to that, I wanted to share some information about last week's episode, where we were talking about always chasing Gomers. So we ran into a few things that I wanted to tell you about, because one of them was from our buddy Mike McGonigal. He sent in, Kentucky Mike, he sent in some great information about that episode and the tie-ins that we have related to that, because he was talking about it being on My Three Sons. Now, I don't know if you guys knew that, but by it, I mean Andy's house. So Andy's house was on My Three Sons as well. We had several other people who had mentioned it, but Mike actually went out and found the episode and was able to get me some screenshots, so that if you're watching the show, you'll be able to see this. But let me pull up what he actually told me, and we'll get on to it from there. Let's see. Mike says about always chasing Gomers again. In Monday's chat room, we discussed Andy's house showing up on My Three Sons. So that was discussed during the chat room, that if you would like to join us during the show for the chat room, it's live.twochairsnowaiting.com. If you go there on Monday nights at 7:00, you'll be able to see the chat room and join in the conversation. Tonight in our chat room, we got 55 people in here. So this is absolutely great. So thanks to everybody that's here live, because you really keep things going for me, but hopefully I can keep it going for you. But so anyway, we had from Mike, as I'm saying here, he sent me information about that particular episode, because they were talking about it during the podcast last week in the chat room about Andy's house showing up on My Three Sons. He sent me pictures of the dad, Fred McMurray, on My Three Sons walking, and they're in front of the garage that was at Andy's house. There's a shot then that shows them looking, you can see Aunt Petey Pat's house from Gone with the Wind that's right beside Andy's house on the show. You can see it in the background as they're walking through it. And then you have Fred McMurray walking up to Andy's house. You can see all that stuff. So let me read you what Mike actually wrote. It was in season 7, episode 2 of My Three Sons, called Fly Away Home, when Steve, Fred McMurray, visits his hometown of Bedford Springs. He said he found the episode on YouTube and took some screenshots that, again, if you're watching the video version, you can see the screenshots. But if you don't have time to do that, maybe you can get on YouTube and search for that and find it and actually watch the episode itself. He said, I thought you might get a kick out of seeing or even watching the episode, seeing these pictures that he'd sent me. So you can definitely see them. They go into Andy's house. There's also a scene where you see Chip and Ernie walking right in front of Foley's groceries. And of course, then you see, I mean, there's several shots you'll see that is Andy's house and other scenes around Mayberry. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to send that in. Another little bit of information I got last week. I didn't look it up yet to find out what her name was, but we were talking about the episode from last week with Gomer, and in that episode, the lady who played Sergeant Carter's mother, turns out she was in another episode just right around that same time where Sergeant Carter was blamed for wrecking a car because he had scratched it, I think is what this topic is. So we'll go back in and look at that and report fully on it. But that lady that played his mother was born the same year as Frank Sutton, Sergeant Carter. So they're the same age. But she was playing his mother. I thought that was interesting. And I forgot who it was that sent me that at this point. So if you sent it to me, thank you. And I don't remember who it was. So thank you very much. But that was very interesting that they were born the same year. So we'll have some more updates from last week's Gomer Pyle episode that we talked about. Always Chasing Gomers was the name of the episode. Go back and watch last week's show or listen to it if you'd like to hear more information. All right, so we got some other good information this week that I wanted to share with you about the episode we did a couple of weeks ago about the making the whole cabinet a weapon. I don't know if y'all remember that one or if you've listened to it, but it's about the gun cabinet that's there on the Andy Griffith Show. So the gun cabinet is that was there and what kind of weapons were in it and all that kind of stuff. So I got this information from Wes Weems. He said, first of all, I want to thank you for the great podcast that you do each week. I wanted to let you know that for the past 9 years, this is different. Let me go ahead and read this because this is not about the gun cabinet. The next stuff is. So let me read you this from Wes because this is awesome. So for the past 9 years, I've been working as a background actor in movies and in television, being part of over 35 movies and television shows. It doesn't pay well, and my roles are very small, but I am having so much fun. During the summer of 2019, I had the opportunity to work on the movie Hillbilly Elegy, directed by Ron Howard. I played the part of a Yale law professor. It was such an honor to be able to be directed by Ron Howard. I kept thinking throughout the day, I'm working with Opie Taylor. While setting up different shots, Mr. Howard kept putting his thumbs together, making a viewfinder with his hands, just like the movie producer did when he came into Mayberry. I guess that is where Ron learned that little trick. By the way, I did not let him cut down the old oak tree for the movie. He did not poke fun at the people of Mayberry either, because we knew that Aunt Bee wouldn't watch it, even if Rock Hudson was in it, if he did that. Thank you for the Mayberry information you give each week, because I heard about Ron Howard making this movie in one of your podcasts. And when I heard you tell this information, I knew I wanted to try to get an extra role in that movie so that I could have the experience of being directed by one of the great directors of our time. Thank you for all you do, Wes Weems. All right. So we got to watch Hillbilly Elegy. If you've watched it yet, it's on Netflix. You can watch it and you can look for Wes as which professor did he say he was? Small, but having a part. He was a Yale law professor. So you have to watch for that and watch him in there. So thank you, Wes. Thanks for writing in. That is great information. All right, so let's go back to we're going to talk about the guns a little bit that were in Mayberry. So we're going to go back to that because that's what I started talking about, making our whole cabinet a weapon. So I got a note from Elizabeth. This was on the digest, the Who's Been Messing Up the Digest. She says, while watching Andy show Trey Bowden Barney's gun From the angle of the camera, it looked like the gun was turned toward Trey. It just got me to thinking about times that guns had played a role in the show, like when Andy got a rifle out of the rack and pointed it at Goober. Okay. So that's what she's talking about. Goober takes a car apart. So in the episode Goober Takes a Car Apart, Andy takes the gun out of the rack, and she's saying, it looks like Andy took it out and told him to get that car out of there right now. And so he took it out and he points it at Goober. All right. So that's what she's saying. So, was there any other times? There's several other shows where guns are prominent, and things. So, all right. So she talked about that. So then I had a response about that. She said, from Joe, who said, Elizabeth asked about episodes where guns were prominent. Okay. She mentioned the one episode where Andy points a gun at Goober in anger. And he goes, this pointing of guns at people is something that always surprised me on the Andy Griffith Show. The very first commandment of gun safety is to assume that every gun is loaded and to never point the gun at anyone. Yet there are several episodes where guns are pointed directly at people. All right, so I went back and I looked at the episode Goober Takes a Car Apart to look to see if Andy was pointing the gun at Goober. And there is one shot where it really looks like he was probably pointing it at him. Okay. But I can tell you why it happened, but that's here, there. If you look at the shots when you can actually see Goober and Andy in the same shot, the gun is always pointed off to Goober's right. So it's pointed Andy is sitting at his desk, turned toward the gun rack area of that wall. And Goober is standing there straight between him and that wall. And so Andy has the gun kind of pointed off to Andy's left, off of Goober's right shoulder or arm. It's off that direction, kind of over towards, he'll be pointing at where the bulletin board is located, right? So in the shots, that's where it is when they're together. But when you see Andy and it's showing him as a close-up, it looks like he'd be pointing the gun more toward where Goober was. Okay. So it would definitely give you the impression that he was holding the gun at Goober. This is getting out of Mayberry just a little bit and talking about actually making the show. So you got to remember it was shot with one camera. So the shots when Andy was actually in the shot with Goober, he's not pointing it at him. In the one shot where you only see Andy, he is pointing it kind of where Goober would be, but Goober wouldn't necessarily be there. So my guess is, because Andy did use guns, he would know gun safety rules. He probably wouldn't. He would have thought about not pointed it at George Lindsay. Okay, so we're getting out of the Andy Griffith Show and into the real world a little bit. But when the shot of Andy alone as a close-up was shot, George may not have even been standing there. And so Andy was just doing his part as they shot that. So Andy was likely not pointing the gun at George because George may or may not have been there, but he may not have been standing in the same spot because they had to move the cameras around. And so that would have possibly made George have to move. There's lots of things there. So I'm only telling you that so that you'll feel a little better when you watch the episode. If you see it, that Andy's not really pointing the gun straight at George. Okay. All right, let's go on to the rest of what he says. Besides Elizabeth's example, there's one where Uncle Ollie is in the courthouse and he takes a rifle and points it at Andy. And in Andy the Matchmaker, Barney points his gun directly at Andy's face and then directly at the prisoner. And I know there are other examples, is what Joe goes on to say, but these two come right to mind. A little surprising, and to me, different than ongoing gag of Barney's accidentally firing his revolver into the floor. So it's a little surprising that they were pointing guns at people. I have to agree. That is definitely something as a gun. You never point it. It's always assumed to be loaded. So But there are times when you're filming something when things would be that way. Like when Uncle Ollie took his off, yeah, he was supposed to point at people because the whole idea was that he was being irresponsible, right? And he was threatening people with a gun. And Barney, well, Barney's Barney, but even worse that Barney was doing it because Barney, it goes off when Barney holds it. So that's even worse. But anyway, just something to be watching for. I've never really paid that much attention to that, but I thought it was interesting. I thought it kind of went along with the episode we were doing a couple of weeks ago about making the whole cabinet a weapon. We were asking what kind of guns they were. And so it brought that up. So thank you to Joe and Elizabeth for bringing those ideas out so that we would look into it and kind of see what was going on. So anyway, those are some of the things I had had to show you. But I'll tell you what, I was watching the episode Goober Takes a Car Apart, and I got to tell you that it was what I needed. It had been a very stressful day at work. And then I got to sit down and I was doing some screenshots so that I would be able to look into this and kind of see which angle the guns were and things like that. But I was watching that as I was going through the show there, and it was just a great timing for me because this show is a very funny one. There's a part when Andy comes back. You remember, so the whole show was that basically Andy was going off to try to get to go to a sheriff's convention, right? So he's getting Goober to stay in the courthouse and answer the phone and don't do anything but tell him I'll be back in a day and a half and I'll take care of it when I get back. If they need to talk to me, I'll leave a number. All right. So that's all he was trying to get Goober to do. And so Goober ends up, because he can't stay out of the courthouse, he's got to, and he can't leave the courthouse and he's got to work. He takes that car apart and puts it into the courthouse, right? So when Andy comes back from being gone for, several days, he finds, he finds Goober and Floyd and Gilly Walker in the courthouse with, a car, right? So he walks into the door of the courthouse. He's completely flabbergasted, and one of the people in the crowd there, and I think it was Tom Jacobs, Danny Thomas's brother, actually says, "How'd they do it, Andy?" Right? So Andy walks into the courthouse and sees Floyd looking at the car with Gilly and Goober there with him, and he's just like, "How did you get this car in here, Goober?" And they go through that whole story about how he got it in. And then my favorite part is going, because Floyd's telling him, "Oh, it's a beautiful piece of work. Oh, you don't want to see that, Andy. Oh, it was beautiful." Well, Goober, I got just one question for you. How are you going to get this car out of here? And Goober looks at him and goes, "Out." Like he had never thought of it before. And I know for a fact, because George talked about it, George Lindsay talked about this, that was one of his favorite lines because he got so much out of that one line, "Out." Oh, because he had never thought about it. He never thought about that. And that's what George said. He said Goober didn't even think about it. He didn't even thought about how's he getting this car back out of this place. So anyway, I just love that line by itself is worth watching the whole episode to me. And of course, then later, he's supposed to take the car and get it out of the courthouse. So Andy says, "Well, I'm going to leave. And when I come back in the morning, I want this car out of here. It's got to be out." And so Andy comes back and he walks in because he comes back a little before that, obviously, is I guess when he does that. And he walks in and Floyd is sitting in that car and he's like, "Well, Andy, I'm thinking about buying this car." And so then, Goober decides that he's going to put it back together. Well, Andy leaves, and that's when he tells him, "I'm going to leave, and you're going to get this car out of here," because he gets mad at Goober and has him against the wall, against the gun rack. And he's pointing at him, "When I come back in the morning, this car better be gone and all traces of it." That kind of information. So Andy's gone, and he goes home and he finds out from Aunt B that the Sheriff Jackson is on his way back to Mayberry, on his way home from the sheriff's convention, and he's going to drop by the courthouse to see Andy. So Andy rushes back to the courthouse, and now the car is put completely back together because it was partially apart. He had already taken the body off. So Andy walks in the courthouse, and then there's Goober. What did you do? He said, well, Floyd couldn't decide if he wanted to buy it without the body on it, so I put the body back on. You said you wasn't coming back till tomorrow. Oh, I just love it. And Andy starts trying to pull the door off to get it out of there, and in walks the sheriff because, you know, this is Sheriff, I think, Jackson, the president of the Sheriff's Association. They're from over in Mount Pilot, and so they drop by, and they have that whole conversation where as they start to realize, they first like, there's a car in your courthouse. Yeah. How'd you get it in here? He did it, Goober. Goober's like, yeah, there's a lot of work. He said, what? Oh, wait a minute. They're like, yeah, this is an exhibit for your safety promotions. This is great. And Andy's like, uh-huh. Yeah, that's it. And so they asked Goober, you know, if he'll come do it. It starts to work out really good. They're wanting to do it over in Mount Pilot. So Andy's kind of acting proud. And Goober says, they said, well, could you come do that at our? Oh, yeah, I could, but I got to get this one out of here first. And Andy's like, and they kind of look confused. And Andy goes, Goober, tell you what, why don't we just leave it in here a little longer just to make sure that everybody has gotten, has seen it and everything. And then he ends, and then Goober says, say it again. That's another line I use, say it again, a lot. So anyway, so that's a great episode, guys. Go watch Goober Takes a Car Apart. That's in the 5th season of the Andy Griffith Show. George Lindsay is classic in that one. And of course, at the end, you can decide for yourself if they actually have Andy pointing the gun at Goober or not. And you can let me know what you think as well. So there you go. That's what I've got. And let me let you go now and hear a real report from Randy Turner with This Week in Mayberry History.
Welcome to This Week in Mayberry History, a report by special correspondent Randy Turner of the Gomer and Goober Pyle Comic Book Literary Guild of the Mayberry Historical Society.
Leo Gordon's character in The Andy Griffith Show had trouble with the law, but so did the actor himself at one point in his life. Leo was born in Brooklyn, New York on December the 2nd, 1922. Perhaps the defiant streak that he would eventually learn to control came from being raised in abject poverty during the Depression. After the United States entered World War II, Leo enlisted. After having served 2 years, he was given an undesirable discharge, a type of termination from the service that does not involve punishment, but indicates the soldier had serious departures from the conduct and performance expected by the military, and so did not qualify for an honorable discharge. Shortly afterward, Leo and another man attempted to rob the owner of a bar filled with customers in Southern California. Leo was shot in the stomach by a police officer and was convicted of armed robbery. He served 5 years in San Quentin. But while incarcerated, Leo turned his life around and truly reformed, self-educating himself in the prison library. If Leo's life experiences after leaving the military sound familiar, it has been said that writers Jim Fritzell and Everett Greenbaum modeled the character Leo played in The Andy Griffith Show, Luke Comstock, on Leo himself. In High Noon in Mayberry, Leo played Luke, a man Andy had shot in the leg while stopping a robbery. While Andy and Barney were concerned just why Luke was returning to Mayberry years later, fearing it might be to seek revenge, it was revealed that he had actually turned his life around while recuperating from the gunshot and truly reformed, opening a chain of successful TV repair stores once he was released. Once Leo was released from prison, he used the GI Bill to enroll in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in the late 1940s, where he studied acting alongside future stars Grace Kelly and Anne Bancroft. Leo began his acting career as a stage actor. While appearing in a Los Angeles play, he was spotted by a Hollywood agent and made the transition to becoming a film and television actor. At 6 feet 2 inches, Leo was an imposing presence, especially when he spoke in his deep voice that could easily be perceived as menacing. Leo made his television debut in a made-for-TV movie in 1952 and his film debut the following year. He later appeared in the pilot for the TV series Gunsmoke. When the series was picked up, substantial changes were made to the look of the sets, but the pilot was still aired in the middle of Gunsmoke's first season. Leo appeared in the 1954 film Riot in Cell Block 11. It is often erroneously reported that the movie was filmed in San Quentin, with the point being made that this is the same prison in which Leo had served 5 years. Actually, the film was shot on location, but in Folsom Prison, though Leo's record did still factor into the production. The Folsom warden at first objected to Leo being in the cast. In fact, the warden objected to the whole production in general, but was turned around when he met a fairly low man on the totem pole, but a man who came from a family of judges from Fresno. That man was Sam Peckinpah, who got his first film work on Riot in Cell Block 11 and later became a noted film director and screenwriter who first became well known for the 1969 movie The Wild Bunch. Leo usually played heavies, such as John Dillinger in the 1957 movie Babyface Nelson, though he sometimes played less antagonistic, more sympathetic roles. And while Leo had turned his life around, he apparently still had a bit of a rebellious streak at times. Leo may best be remembered for playing the recurring role of Big Mike McComb on the Western series Maverick. James Garner, who played Brett Maverick, once said that in one of their first scenes together, Leo actually punched him intentionally instead of throwing a fake punch. Garner said he returned a punch when they filmed their next scene. Leo was not only a successful character actor with hundreds of appearances in film and episodic television, he was also a writer. He wrote several screenplays, primarily for director Roger Corman. His first was the 1959 crime film The Crybaby Killer, starring a young Jack Nicholson. Some of his other work for Corman resulted in movies titled similarly to the type that sometimes played in Mayberry's Grand Theater, such as another 1959 film, Attack of the Giant Leeches. Leo also wrote for many television series, such as Maverick, Bonanza, and Cheyenne. He notably wrote 21 screenplays for Adam 12. Leo passed away in the year 2000 at the age of 78. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks for listening, and remember to take care of yourself and one another, and take Andy's advice, and go out there and act like somebody.
Well, thank you, Randy. As always, he comes up with some of the greatest information. If you want to make sure you don't miss out on the Mayberry stuff that Randy's doing on the internet, send him an email at turnersgrade@gmail.com, turnersgrade@gmail.com, and he'll make sure you don't miss out on any of it. So, wow, he has some really cool stuff. And in our chat room, Margaret was in there, and she posted this almost immediately. And it was from his IMDb page. Is where this is coming from, is what she told us. This is from from his IMDb page. And it says this. It says, about working with John Wayne in Hondo in 1953, in which Gordon played a villain who was killed by John Wayne. It says, in the scene where he kills me down by the stream, I reach for my gun and he shoots me. I buckle up and I fall forward, or pitched forward. Wayne hollered, cut, cut, even though John Farrow was directing. Wayne says to me, what was that? When you get hit in the gut with a slug, you go flying backwards. I pulled my shirt up to show where I'd really been shot in the gut. It was by the police when they arrested him for armed robbery previously, in years previous. And yeah, I got hit point blank and I went forward, is what he told Wayne. So anyway, so there you go. So that's a nice piece of work from Margaret. Thank you very much for adding that little bit. So he had actually been shot in the stomach and he fell forward. And so John Wayne was like, what are you doing? You don't fall forward if you get shot. And he's like, I did. That's what I did. So very cool stuff, man. Great information. Good job from our chat room and from Randy. So great job. All right, guys, that is all I have for us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. I always feel like I'm kind of cheating when I just go through and I just talk about an episode like I was kind of doing with Goober. That's why I said a real report from Randy, because I'll just, if you get me talking about an episode from the Andy Griffith Show, I'll just talk forever. Because, man, what a great episode that was. How you aiming to drive? Speed, speed, speed. That's all he does. Oh, and then Goober, the one where Goober says, all right, you can just rebuild it. Just take it apart. All right, thanks, Alice. Sweet little lady. I think she's a Quaker. Oh, there's just so much in that episode that's so good. Folks, if you love the Andy Griffith Show, I would love to hear from you. And you can give me a call at 888-684-8415, or you can email me at floyd@imayberry.com. I'd love to hear from you. I love Mayberry Conversations, and it's always fun to hear from you. You hear from me every week, so it's really fun for me when I get to hear from you. So thanks. I want to thank everybody that's been ordering from Weavers. Keep it up. We're trying to get all the orders out to everybody in time for Christmas time, and so we thank you. So head over to weaversdepartmentstore.com and check it out. See all the stuff they got over there. Need to get it ordered soon because I think cutoff date's the 15th. Folks, have a great Mayberry week, and we'll see you next time right here on Two Chairs.